The following interview talks about suicide and may cause triggers for viewers. Discretion is advised. If you or anyone you know requires support for mental health issues at any time, then free phone or text 1737.
Entrepreneur Jenene Crossnan caused a sensation with a blog post in which she described a suicide attempt. She joins me now.
Hello. That was quite an entry, wasn't it? Yeah. Not sure the right faces to give you for that. It's not the way I've been introduced ever before.
What is that like, hearing that out loud?
Not very good. But let's not start with tears. We could end there, but let's not start there.
Where did it start for you?
Where should we start? 20 years ago?
Is that when it started?
No, not at all. More to the point of how far back do you pull a thread as to the behaviour that you set in terms of the expectations for yourself or the way that you create business or put yourself out into the world or on the stage, etc. Where did those threads begin?
Well, I might suggest that they started with childhood.
Possibly.
Tell me about your family.
How much are paying you by the hour?
I'll let you know at the end of it.
No, oh, God. My parents are already feeling a bit raw from this, so let's not drag too much further through it.
It does have an effect on the family, doesn't it?
It has an effect on a lot of people. And I made a point of, as cathartic as a process as it was for me, because it was, and it has been, I was very aware of the fact that it wouldn't necessarily be the same for everybody else. And so when I had published it, then I let everybody know that I had done it. And individually, including my husband, I made sure they all had, here it is, I'm really sorry that you're having to read this, and I want you to know that I'm in a good place and that I would like to talk more about this. But I'm sorry if this upsets you. And the hardest one was probably watching my 16-year-old stepdaughter read it and watch her face just crumple. It was heartbreaking. And there was a look of heartbreak on her face. It was only a few months or so ago. So, but it was, last week same day it came out that I sat down.
So this is all.
Read it.
I mean, there was no indication of how recent it was. We're talking. This is.
I just used the hashtag TBT, turn back time. Yeah. I did say a few months, and I said turn back time a few months. And look, it has been a hell of a year, and I think these things have a way of escalating. And it's interesting for me you can see the outpouring of emotion from people publicly, right? And I was getting that across all channels, but also privately. The phone calls, the text messages, the emails, the private tweets, the private Facebooks, the private Instagrams, the private LinkedIns. We're talking hundreds and hundreds. And it's obviously very nice to have people tell you they love you, and my favourite is still James Herman ringing me saying, I love you, don't die. Thanks, James. I'm pleased you care.
Hashtag.
I just cracked up. But it was actually just the raw honesty from people I've never met. People who live on the other side of the world, who I'll probably never ever in my entire life meet, telling me their deepest, darkest things that have happened to them. And I couldn't get over how many people were in a really similar space or have been or are going through. And I think the ones that I could relate to the most were the ones who were founders, who could entirely understand the unrelenting pressure we put on ourselves that then is a pile-on of all of the things that go on top of that. And I think Ben Keeps nicely summed it up by saying, we expect our founders to be superhuman, to be superheroes, and then we put them on stages and expect them to be the gurus. You can see where imposter syndrome comes from.
Well, it is a role that you've got to perform, isn't it? You know, if you don't have confidence in yourself, then how can anybody else? Fake it till you make it, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, I don't want to I don't want to get offside with mum and dad, but have you got any siblings?
Damn, you're bringing it back to that.
Have you got any siblings?
I am the youngest of 7 children.
7?
Mm-hmm. Mixed family set up, so mum and dad both had marriages and children before having my brother and I. So I'm very much the youngest. My eldest brother is 16 years older than me. Dad's entrepreneurial and grew up on the North Shore in a very sort of middle of the road, not connected in any way. Dad had his own company from when I was about the age of 13. But aside from that, pretty normal, really. Well, at least it was my normal. I didn't know
But
any
there's
other way.
nothing quite normal about being the youngest of 7 and trying to prove your way in life. Is that where it all started, do you think?
You really could go into psychology. I really did pay someone a lot of money to help me figure that one out. You bang on the money. That's exactly, I'd suggest, what has been my biggest driver. Your greatest strength is your greatest weakness, right?
It's not a bad thing, but you've got to control it, right?
Yeah, totally. And there's no doubt about it. I'm very aware of the fact that that desire to want to prove yourself it comes from being the youngest, the least, the one that nobody really probably had that much time for, because they had quite a lot else on. So yes, that certainly has probably been it. And then I left school at 16. I had glandular fever. I've never sat an exam in my life. So I've done nothing normal. I didn't go through those years of 5th, 6th and 7th form, or year 11, 12, 13, that most people go through, which are quite formative. And then going on to university, where you make the friendships that go with that. I was already working full-time. And then after that, going on an OE. I didn't do that. I had my first business. I got married at 19. I bought my first house at 20. Started my first company at 20. And so I did everything early. And I think that's what it's called, given I'm turning 40 in less than a month. I think we call this a midlife crisis. Just a rather sensational one, probably a bit bigger than most would aim to have.
Have you had much time out at all over the years? Have you you've done any holidaying, any travelling that wasn't business related?
Not for any extended periods of time. One of the goals I made for this year, and we've actually done okay on that, it's just been amongst lots and lots of stress. Scotty and I are both entrepreneurs, both have growing businesses. Very demanding businesses, was that every 3 months we'd have a week together somewhere without phones and computers. Trying to avoid divorce would be a nice way to go about that.
Well, 21 years in counting is a pretty good effort, or is this... How many?
He's number 3.
Well, tell me about that.
We could be here
Let's
all day.
just back up the truck here. Somebody started that meter, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. Can someone put some more? Go feed my
So
dog.
how long have you been together with Scotty?
Just coming up 8 years.
Okay. Well, I think credit to you. You've made a lot of people, as you've obviously surprisingly found out, feel normal. I mean, that's the sad thing about your experience, that it's actually more normal than any of us would care to admit.
It was cathartic.
Yeah.
I feel like I've shed a skin. I feel like 20 years of doing it a certain way has just been now thrown out the window and put behind me and gone, no, I'm not doing it that way anymore. I refuse to. I don't want to be the poster child for stress causes cancer. I don't want to look back on this and go, God, how did I not have my eyes open to what I was doing to myself and what I was allowing to have happen as well. And also, there's something about turning 40 that's been a big thing for me. And I know people go, it's easy, you wait till you turn 50 or whatever else. But for me, it's a marker. It's a marker in the change for me in fertility. That's been a hell of a journey. And so it has a whole ownership in that. But also, as I started out as the 20-year-old, I was the kid that you guys covered. Like, you probably don't remember it, but that's how Lloyd and Morrison found me, was through NBR. He read something that you guys had published, and he sent me an email out of the blue, and I had no idea who he was. So he'd like to invest in your company. So that's how this merry-go-round began.
Well, it's not our fault,
It's not your fault at all. Not at all. And Lloyd changed my life in the most positive ways you can imagine. But that is dating back nearly 20 years ago, and that's I've kind of been doing that way for a really, really long time, and now as the founder and I guess like more of the director, I want to be able to less be about operations and letting it run my entire life, and actually more be about me being in charge and having a view of what I'd like to have out of this as well.
You mentioned fertility. Is that
the F word?
Is that obviously something that you and Scotty you'd like to have?
So look, we had a couple of years of fertility, and didn't quite manage to get the cabs completely off the rank. So I managed to get there, but not succeed much further past about 9 weeks. And I was pretty transparent through all that process. Transparent with my board, my shareholders, my teammates, our children, everybody. They needed to know. I'm a fairly candid sort of person, so carrying a whole heap of other stuff was going to be quite obvious otherwise.
Well, success after you've had so many letdowns, and IVF, I don't know, there's just something about that process that you think is a foregone conclusion once you have success.
Yeah, and we all thought that. And I was actually in the car with 4 other of my colleagues going to a big presentation, and I got the call from fertility clinic, and I answered on speakerphone. I was driving. I didn't think anything of it. I normally would go, "Oh, you're on speakerphone," and didn't do that. And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've got terrible news, but you've miscarried." And my entire car and everybody. And I wrote a piece after that, and people are more than welcome to go and find it on my personal website, because I felt after that I had to normalise being female. Like, if we're going to break through some of the glass ceilings that exist for us, they're ones that we often put ourselves in by not talking about things that are fundamental elements of being a human being, such as carrying babies. That's how life happens. We have to do that job. It is an important part. And it doesn't mean we can't do all the other jobs as well. But the more we feel comfortable being able to share the journey and the hardships as well as the upsides, I think that the more comfortable other people will feel with that as well. It's everybody's personal decision how they handle it, but for me, it was a cathartic process. I had to get it out. I had to share it and go, here's what happened.
Would you be open to the idea that it's possibly more likely now than it's ever been, because you've had this cathartic dropping of so much baggage?
Well, you and my specialist can join forces on that. I had the hard word put on me the other day, actually, time for me to make a decision on it, because otherwise it's time to shut up shop. And that's just, I'm quite candid about my endometriosis journey, and it's, wreaked havoc on my fertility, and, I've had all sorts of operations, and I'm nowhere near the end of that. And the only way to probably correct that is yank it all out. It's got to all go.
And that's a very definitive.
Very definitive, And I've inspected all the things and turned them over. Do I want to adopt? Do I want a surrogate? Whatever else. And I sort of feel like obviously I get a lot of that from having the children that I have in my life and the way that I do. I wanted something that was something about Scotty and I together, and I wanted the experience of the biology that is. If you line up the pros and the cons list is way longer in terms of number of items that are on it, especially when you're getting to our age where the children are just, getting it to the other side of it. They're becoming older, and they'll be leaving home in a few years, and I can see what that life looks like. I can almost smell it. But the pros list is this one item. If you ask any person who has children and you say to them, "Tell me about that," and they'll say, "It's the single greatest thing that ever happened to me." And I'm proposing not doing it. And I'm a FOMO person that likes to experience lots of things. And I think I've lived up to that through my life so far. If I were, not by my own hand, but if I were to die tomorrow, I think there'd be plenty to be able to fill an obituary of what I've managed to do, and not just from a success point of view, not that at all, but throwing myself out of planes and climbed things and ridden stuff, and lots of cool things that I feel pretty proud of having done. Except that one big thing. And I just don't want to regret that. I don't want to get to 60 and go, God, I think I wish I'd tried it a bit harder, and man, I actually let my business guide whether I should do that or not. And it has guided my decision on that so far. So the long story short, Todd, would be to say that I'm giving myself space right this second. I'm actually, for the first time ever, just creating some space around myself so that I can make decisions for the right reasons and not for knee-jerk reactions or fear of missing out or whatever else, but actually just see if I can get to a feeling in here of what I really genuinely want to do.
We believe that we're successful because we are a certain way, but we must be mindful of why we were that way in the first place. And if that is coming from a place that can't be replaced because it's something as special as bringing a child into the world, then what the heck are we doing confusing that with business success?
Yeah, look, a self-fulfilling prophecy. I can entirely concur. Scotty and I took ourselves away to Byron Bay a couple of weeks ago. I took myself off to the naughty corner. So I needed some time out in the back of everything that had happened. And he was really good to, down tool and come over with me. And we just literally rode our we had bikes that came with our little Airbnb. It was a cheap little place we were staying at that literally was one room. And we rode our bikes into the township of Byron Bay, and then we would come back, have a smoothie, and walk for 3 hours on the beach. And that's pretty much how the day rolled every day for 10 days. It was glorious. It was beautiful. We saw dolphins and lots of surfers, and it was just really relaxed. I came home and I felt like I had a visceral reaction to being back in my old life. It was like day dot. Like you're supposed to come back from holiday and you get this glow that goes overview that it should just sort of last longer for how long you've been on holiday. I think I got about half an hour out of it. And then I just went, I don't want to be getting up at 5:30 every morning and coming home at 7 o'clock every night and rushing from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting and just feeling all the pressure and being pulled in every direction all day, every day. I don't want to do it anymore. And it was probably 2 nights after that I just turned to Scotty, to your point, and said, what is the point of having our businesses and doing what we do if we can't at least have some control over our lives? And why is it everything that we get to enjoy, the time we spend with each other, is the reward only once every 40 whatever, like every 25 weeks we get to do this? This is ridiculous. It should be that they enable us to be able to go for a walk on the beach in the morning together. Then we can get into doing whatever it is that we do. And I just, I don't want any more. And it was the beginning of the internal foot down that I was saying, no, I'm not doing it any longer. I refuse. It's taken too much from me, and I don't want to.
I don't want to be the person that sort of points you back into business, but
and I love business. I love it, but I can't have my life like it has had.
I can't help but think that if you did it differently, I genuinely believe that deep down you think you've got to sacrifice all of that to be successful in business. And yet I think the reality is, prove yourself wrong.
Totally. Look, Mum and Dad won't listen to this anyway, so it's fine. That's Dad. That's Dad to a T.
So why do you have to be Dad?
Exactly. But this is the point I have taken on board, and I've gone, I'm not doing it anymore. And I guess that's part of the reason I had to get it out. I had to write it and I had to share it with the world. I read Emily Best's story. We had the headline, which was how raising $2-something million in a seed round really went. And I read it and went, oh my God, I relate to every single piece of this. And then some. And I thought, God, I'm actually being quite irresponsible, having not really shared what this has been like. I tell people occasionally, raised $5.5 million, 12 rounds of funding, and they sort of look at me like, Jesus, you're a sucker for punishment. I'm like, yeah, apparently I am. And I don't really tell them much more than that, other than, it's a hard landscape, having a female-centric business in a sea of male investors. It's a difficult place to raise money. New Zealand is not necessarily all that progressive in this space. And I sort of looked at it and I went, no. And I needed to. And I'd actually already started writing a few of the chapters. Literally from reading her article to publishing was an hour.
Wow.
And when I get on a roll, I write. And I love writing. And you can tell because I don't sub-edit it particularly well. And
I thought it was actually pretty clean copy.
I miss words. And I'm just a touch dyslexic, things that come out slightly the wrong way. And then I'll pick them up through the day after I reread and I go, and I just go on and change that one. But it came out pretty quickly because I had written the guts of it, the really gritty stuff as part of what I thought was going to become a book I wanted to write, which I still think that there's something in there eventually I might write, but it just needed out. And it was that holding myself accountable, that if I put it out there, I can't be, turning around, 5 weeks from now, 5 months from now, and acting exactly the same way.
People are going to hold you to account. That's
Everyone's
what
going to hold me
I love
accountable
about what you've done. I mean, I recently gave up alcohol and cannabis. I've self-medicated for years, and
Right.
one of the cathartic things about doing that publicly is that nobody gives me a hard time when I go out and I don't
No one's
drink.
offering you anything.
No, they're like, it's okay. We're not going to give you a hard time, dude, because that's really cool if that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell me about the business. I almost feel awkward about getting to that now, but your shareholders and your
don't, yeah.
investors are going to be going like, does this mean that we're in the shit? I mean,
yeah.
I genuinely think that it's the best thing that could have happened to your business, but tell me how
They've
this is, how is this going to play out?
Yeah, it's been an interesting one to watch. I'm very fortunate to have the phenomenal Rob Campbell as a shareholder. And he's almost always the first person to go, you're doing great, really proud of you. He's such an amazing person like that. So he was one of the first. And then there was just a steady trickle of others. And because we've got like 43 shareholders. They all pretty much had said the same. They know how hard, well, not probably to that extent, but they knew that I'd been through a pretty tough time. I've been fairly candid about operations, and they'd seen the moment in time of me having to get my head around how I could rearrange this business so that it didn't require so much of me. Because essentially, the strategy that I had in play was to build a global brand and to build something that we could put on the global stage, and my goal is to get it into London, and we'll end up exiting out of that probably to a large brand hair salon supply company. I wouldn't necessarily say who, but you can guess yourself some of the ones that we may have partnered with recently. There's those sorts of things who are investing heavily in acquiring companies like ours to help them figure out how they can be operating in a new world, for the new consumer. And I have a really clear vision of that. I know exactly what it is that we're doing, and I have done from day dot. And it's one of my strengths as insight. I love thinking about how the new consumer operates, and I can see exactly how that should roll out. And that does require funding. And that has been really hard because we have done all the things we're supposed to do. We've hit all the milestones and then still not got any further forward. And from a funding point of view, been able to get that elusive cornerstone investor, it's been drip fed. It's been 50 grand there and 50 grand there and 50 grand there. And whilst that keeps you lean and hungry in some respects, because of course you get very, very particular about what you're doing, you don't necessarily make a lot of traction. And the frustrating part was getting into Australia of, well, we can't fund you until you're in Australia, but then once you're in Australia, we can't fund you until you've proven the fact that what you did in New Zealand wasn't just a blip, but actually we can recreate it here. So then gives you this pause of like, well, why did we spend all that time doing that? Because apparently that counts for nothing. So I kind of got to this point, I very much got to this point where I realised there was not much more I could do. I had done everything. Everything that could feasibly be asked of me, I had done. I had stood on the stage around the world. I had fronted up and made the most amazing amount of cold calls and cold doorstepping to get in front of people and do deals and get recognised and be championed in ways that you wouldn't expect a little New Zealand company to do. And we had kicked all the goals and done all the things we're supposed to do. And yet that runway was just getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and getting to the point where we had weeks left of funding. And that's a pretty sickening time to be in. You've got people whose livelihoods are relying on you pulling the rabbit out of the hat. And that's what it feels like at that stage, because it's luck. It's dumb luck that you trip across something that allows you to save the day once again. And so I had this moment of realising, and I'm sure you probably recognise this yourself from being married, is that Scotty and I have this thing called I'd rather be happy than right. And you figure this out in your third marriage,
I'll take your word for it.
And I worked that out. I went, well, my vision's not going to be much use to anybody if I can't bring it to life. So, you know what? Being right's not important. I might fundamentally believe that's the right way to do it, but it doesn't matter. I need to stay alive in this poor choice of words. But I do need to rearrange that. And so I had this really strong self-aware moment of going, it just doesn't matter what I think. Figure out another way to do it. Figure out how to make it a sustainable, profitable business from today. And that means no more growing the way we've been growing. You've got to bring it right back down to what you can afford to grow at with what we're making here. So make New Zealand profitable. How fast can you get Australia to profitability? And any other funding I want to raise is outside of that. It doesn't fund operations. It doesn't fund growth. Not within these markets. It's then for doing something else. So I sat down, rewrote the business plan, and rewrote the forecast. Did that probably within about 5 or 6 hours, and then shared it with all the shareholders. It didn't even go through the board process. It just was at that stage of it just needed time, fast, everybody on board. And I shared that, and I went, this is what we're doing, and this is what we do to stay alive, and this is how we move forward. And then the support started coming through, just one after the other, investors who haven't put in for ages, putting money on the table. And it was almost a sign of, thank you, I can see what you're doing, and I appreciate it. And so then I had to turn around and restructure my team, let go of people who were amazing. And for a lot of them, they're young, they've never had that happen before. That was pretty devastating to go through. And then it's been a case of getting ourselves back together, right? Now we're reorganised, now we're leaner, and here's how we go forward. And that will end up being the right thing and the best thing for us to ever have done, the hardest thing to ever do, and probably one of the biggest lessons I'll ever learn. Does it stop us from being able to get to the world stage and get the exit we want? I don't know. I guess that's up to me from here, how much I let that stop me or how much I let that propel me.
Do you know, I can't help but feel, I know we've done this once before, I know that as a result of profiling you in MBR, we got you your first investor. I can't help but think, a Dragon's Den moment that somebody's watching this right now who is simply asking the question, because you've said all the right things, quite apart from the setup to the business.
Yeah,
clearly,
you're the best thing.
Clearly, you've walked the walk, right? But I honestly believe that somebody now is thinking, okay, well, this makes sense to me. Let's just cut to the chase. How much do you need, and how quickly can you turn this around? How much? If somebody had the checkbook right now, because I know we've got people watching this that are kind of like, I actually like this person. I want to get into business with this person. How much do you need, and how quickly can you turn that around?
Yeah, and look, we have turned around. New Zealand was profitable in this last month,
but
which
I'm
is
talking
great.
about going global.
But going global, that's a different,
which is something
totally
that
different conversation.
is dear to your heart, and you're prepared to give up because maybe you're not right. But somebody out there watching this right now is saying, don't give up on that. If it's just money, how much do you need?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Oh, look, and it's an ongoing conversation as to how much that looks like.
Is it 5 million?
I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10 to do it. So the first generation up there has been first generation marketplace, I should say. So maybe we should just briefly go back a step for anyone who is listening who has no idea what Flossie is. So,
we mentioned the name there, Flossie.
Yeah, sorry, Flossie. So in the front end, it's a consumer app, hair and beauty booking. You can make a booking within seconds. And the reason you might want to do that is people are allergic to their telephone. They just want to be able to do things very quickly, instantly. On the other side, because it's a two-sided marketplace, it manifests as a smart payment service. And this works very well for the service industry, who has really struggled through the changing consumer landscape. People who just don't show up any longer, cancel at the last minute. And so we provide them a paid-up in advance customer who comes back again and again and again and again. And so the marketplaces around the world, first generation, such as Treatwell in the UK, they've been doing very well, just over 200 million New Zealand dollars that they've been turning over. They exited to Recruit Holdings in Japan for just under $500 million 2 years ago. And the founder, is almost the end of his earnout. And so as you can imagine, things are kind of cruising a little bit there. There's not a lot of, they're a great outfit in lots of ways, but there's not necessarily a lot of innovation going into it. They are doing the model that they've always done. And I refer to that as the Expedia of hair and beauty. It's a directory style. It's like Groupon, but with a booking button. And we believe that that was great post-GFC, but we're moving into an entirely new era of personalisation, where actually the customer doesn't want to wade through thousands of listings to find something that's suitable for them. They want to be able to go, yeah, cool, done, literally that quickly. And that requires a really beautiful level of UX and data to be able to provide that moment. And so we see ourselves as a next generation retailer. And that means coming in at a premium level with something that's really that much slicker again. And that's the pitch that I've had for all the VCs, private equity, etc. I've been pitching to in London. I've been up there a number of times in the last year. And it's great because there's such a more evolved market because they've had treat well. They've seen the exit. The investors who got in early have done very well for themselves. So there's a lot of money floating around out of it too. And we've been able to call it the net-a-porter of services. The fact that you can market services in a way that ties and jackets and shoes and handbags have been marketed using social commerce. That Flossie is being able to jump on that kind of train of we don't get things done just because we need our haircut, but because we want it to go a certain style and colour, and it's become more fashion-led. So they're a really evolved market. And so when I've been up there, I've been socialising Flossie as opposed to pitching. It has been a case of, let's not talk about the money yet. Let's find ourselves the right partner, the person who goes, I like what you're saying, I get what you're talking about, but what about this and this? Have you thought about that? And tell me about this. And we're able to create that kind of dialogue. Then that will inevitably become a conversation about, well, how much will it take? Well, it depends on how big we want to go. Right, let's run the numbers together. And I say that, Todd, because I don't want to do what I've done here before. I don't want 43 shareholders up in the UK. I want 1 or 2 great partners, and I want to do that in the right possible way. And so I'd rather take longer. And therefore, if we can take the pressure off the company today to not have to rely on that, then it becomes a personal challenge for me to figure out how to make that work, as opposed to I have to make that work in order to survive. That's quite a nice repositioning, isn't it?
You nailed it.
Yeah.
I reckon you could do it with a baby.
Scotty tried to put the puppy out. He was like, dog? we have a dog.
You can't put a baby outside, Scotty.
No, exactly. Dog sleeps on the end of the bed. I don't think we're going to let the baby sit on there, sleep on the end of the bed. Your baby go
something very, very near.
Yeah.
Look, a final thought. You've shared most generously, but
Far too much,
for
but everything.
anybody else that identifies with what you've gone through and is going through it, what was it that led you not to end your life?
It's funny because I've never been in that place before. I've had lots of friends who have. Lots of people listening and watching will have known the beautiful Mark Singleton, who died last year as the head of Cotton On. He was a good friend of mine. I thought it was a joke when I heard that he had died, to the point where I actually rang his wife because I actually genuinely didn't believe it was true. I thought they were talking about somebody else. And then she had to tell me. And I still feel guilty about that. It was horrific. And the devastation that it caused. But most importantly, so many of us that just went, I had no idea. Him and I would do this for hours. We would talk about all sorts of stuff, usually over a bottle of Belvedere. and I loved that about him. And I really struggle to reconcile that he is not here any longer. And that I can't make that right. And I had undoubtedly that in the back of my head. I wasn't drunk when I was lying on that bottom of the floor. I was devastated and broken from worry and anxiety. I think it was the day before I think this is such an example of how high functioning you can be in these moments, right? I had been in Australia the week before. I'd had an operation. That was on the Monday. The following Monday, I was in Australia, and I had a quite significant operation, and I had a pitch. It was a big pitch. I was pitching for our life, for our partnership, and everything was on the table with it. And it was probably, hands down, one of the best presentations I feel like I've ever done. Just know when you have one that you've nailed it, that you walk away and
you just hope the right people were in the room because you couldn't have done better.
Yeah, and if everything felt right, and there's a whole variety of factors that those things may not turn out, but I knew that I had done everything I could, and I knew within that moment I was accessing all the bits that make me the person I am from a business point of view, because that's what I can do. I can do that really, really well, and I'm completely proud of my ability to do that. And then 2 hours later, put me on a plane. Do you think I could sit on that plane? No, I want to get off that plane. The anxiety was unbelievable. And I've got a team member next to me who looks up to me. And I'm trying to hide this clawing feeling of, I want to vomit because I don't want to be on this plane and I'm going to hyperventilate in a minute. So it's amazing how your brain can go from this extraordinarily high functioning to utterly inability to do the most simplistic of things. And it was a real moment for me of realising just how out of whack everything was for me, that I could do this but not that. And that had to change, and I got it to that level. So when I was lying on that floor, all I guess I can tell you is I was thinking that I didn't want to be broken anymore. And I didn't want to feel like I was so painted. I look at corners like over there, there's literally a corner of a room. I feel like I was painted into this, that there's just no other way out of this, that I can't see how to unravel this because I had built this for myself and my reputation and everything will be entirely in tatters if this falls over. And I absolutely told myself that to be true. So when Shona Grundy and I, the lovely Shona Grundy, who's gone on to share her story of exiting out of Trigger Happy, someone the other way, Trigger Happy. She now works for Greg Cross at Soul Machines. They're awesome people. Greg has been an amazing mentor through all this for me. And she said, there's nothing worse than these awards that you put people up to here and then, when things happen and you fall off these pedestals. I think that's why I did it. I threw myself off my pedestal because I knew that place that I was in that moment where I lined it up, and just when I can't ever do what Mark did. I can't do what I've seen other people do. I can't do this to my children. I can't do this to my family. I can't do this to myself. I can't be this ungrateful for all the opportunities that I've had. I got to get myself out of this corner and not feel like I'm painted in any longer. And that's when I started writing. Not necessarily to share, but to figure out how to make my way through that. And I guess that just led to a whole variety of things that ends up with me sitting here in front of you, telling you this story really, really candidly, because I figured the only way to handle a fall is to control it by throwing yourself off it. Yes, and so that's the crux of it.
Jenene Crossnan, thank you for being raw and real.
Thanks for having me. I think I'm not sure I'll ever want to watch this interview.
If you or anyone you know requires support for mental health issues at any time, then free phone or text 1737.